Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with City AM's comment editor Rachel Cunliffe and the sociologist Ashley Frawley. So let's see what's on some of those front pages now. A married couple have been arrested in connection with the flying of drones near Gatwick Airport. That's according to the Sunday Express. Same story for the Sunday Mirror. The couple's neighbours say they are shocked. Ministers are scrambling to ensure that drone attacks can't be replicated by would-be copycats, according to the Daily Telegraph. The Observer reports that Jeremy Corbyn is facing backlash from within Labour's ranks after saying he'd let Brexit go ahead if the party were to win a snap general election. The Sunday Times leads on a warning from the Security Minister Ben Wallace that the terror group Al-Qaeda is planning on new attacks on airlines. And the Star reports that singer George Michael's grave still has no headstone 2 years after his death. And we're joined tonight by Rachel Cunliffe and Ashley Frawley. Good evening to you both. So we're going to start with the Times and that breaking news this evening, just a few hours ago, that Lord Ashdown, Paddy Ashdown, has died at the age of 77. The headline there, "I fought a lot of battles in my life," that this was one that he couldn't win.
He certainly did fight a lot of battles. That first line there, they call him the action man politician who made the Liberal Democrats a force in British politics. And I think now we might mock the Lib Dems a little bit, especially after recent election defeats. But actually, they were really important as that key third party, as that kind of centrist voice of liberalism, and he helped to do that. And I think in all of the quite antagonistic politics we've had in recent weeks, even as recently as Wednesday, it's kind of worth taking a step back sometimes to look at a political heavyweight figure like this and really think about the past and be a bit more reflective about what we can do maybe a bit better in the future.
Yes, leader of the Liberal Democrats for more than a decade. He was the first leader of the merged Liberal Democrat Party, Ashley, and he described them as being an asterisk when it came to the political polling. But he took them to become a political force, one that couldn't be ignored, didn't he?
Yes, and I think that's a really good point, that when something like this happens, or when you have it's an opportunity to look back and kind of see where we've travelled. I mean, an asterisk, now you might say, neither liberal nor democratic. So perhaps it's a moment to reflect on where the party's gone.
And you've had prime ministers from Jeremy Corbyn to David Cameron and Theresa May, and all coming together to kind of pay their respects and just admire, whether or not you agreed with his politics, admire what he managed to do for the party. And he has been quite a vocal, a kind of strong voice in the House of Lords recently as well. So he will definitely be missed.
Not least of all, of course, about Brexit.
Very much about Brexit. When we'll talk later on about Labour's position on Brexit, and particularly Jeremy Corbyn's, but the Lib Dems and he has been a very, very clear voice for Remain and for a close relationship with Europe, so they will definitely be missing him too.
OK, let's move on to the Mail now and its coverage, a double-page spread on page 10 and 11 of the drone at Gatwick Airport, the chaos that it wrought, but could have been shorter.
Well, this is a really interesting story because we've had loads over the last couple of days about the delays and people's holidays being ruined, but this spread is saying perhaps it could all have been avoided if we'd called the army in earlier. And if that sounds a little bit unfair, it says that the army was actually on standby from 9 p.m. on Wednesday, and they didn't get called in until 3:56 p.m. on Thursday, 19 hours after the first sighting of drones. Why? Why not?
Yeah, what's interesting about this is I think that, the UK, there's a lot of people saying, well, the UK or the government knew that this was an issue, and perhaps they should have done something sooner. But actually, I think that this country tends toward risk aversion and risk awareness. And actually, I think that probably had something to do with the dragging their feet a little bit. I mean, well, I'm Canadian, but right next door to America, I can imagine, the American government being quite quick to shoot this sort of thing down. Obviously, you have to think about it's quite a built-up area, but I imagine that the sort of layers of bureaucracy and uncertainty probably had something to do with the considerable delay between awareness and doing something about it, and to know that they knew exactly what to do about it.
Yeah, it says that. Just right about regulation, that there are laws that prevent the police using jamming equipment, which would have neutralised it, but those rules don't apply to the armed forces, and so they couldn't neutralise it until they decided to call in the army. This story is actually also very critical of various government departments whose responsibility it is. And later on in the spread, you've got this MI5 took command from Grayling because somebody had to get a grip.
More criticism of the Transport Secretary.
Yes, so much criticism of the Transport Secretary. I mean, some people are saying it should be the Home Office because it was a police matter, but obviously it's a transport matter as well. Where was he? He gave a statement late on Thursday. I mean, if there's anyone who you want to be in charge of a national transport crisis, it is not Chris Grayling, who has overseen so many disruptions on our rail system, on our railways. And you just have to wonder, how does he still have a job?
Well, as you say, sources close to Chris Grayling saying that this wasn't his responsibility, that this was a police matter, and therefore
that's clearly Chris Grayling saying that it wasn't Chris Grayling's responsibility.
It's a metaphor for British politics at the moment, just sort of passing the buck.
Yeah, I think so, and I think Chris Grayling is a metaphor for British politics all on his own there.
Interesting in the bottom left there as well that security chiefs at Gatwick Airport had been warned of the threat posed by drones, but the reaction from the airport was to put up signs warning users of drones to stay away from the airport. And also it goes on to say, in a presentation, they looked at what are we doing, monitoring likely launch sites, advertising a drone hotline, and the possibility of utilising neighbourhood watch groups. When you read that now, given the chaos that ensued, it seems very weak precautions being taken. Yeah,
and I think, well, to a certain extent, you cannot prepare for absolutely every eventuality. In fact, you can cause a lot of problems in terms of surveillance, just in the off chance that something will happen. I think actually posting signs around that say, drone owners don't do this might actually be an invitation to deviants. Hey, this is a great thing to do. I hadn't thought of it before. I mean, there's very little that can be done, but the interesting thing is that there are actual technological things that can be done very quickly. And I think that should probably be the thing to do. I mean, to know that there was jamming equipment available. And it wasn't used. I mean, forget about signs, forget about neighbourhood watch. I mean, surely there must be a technological fix.
And if you think that signs are going to encourage people to do it, then I think another one of the papers, I think it was the Telegraph, is worried about copycats.
Yes, so your point there actually about highlighting what damage can be done. That's the Telegraph headline, a scramble to stop fresh drone chaos by copycats.
Well, we've had, no, hang on, it's Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday. We're still talking about this on Saturday. We're still going to be talking about it over Christmas. I think that there may be individuals out there who look at the amount of coverage and the amount of chaos and how easily that chaos was caused.
100,000 people.
I know, but there are some individuals who look at that and say, oh, it'd be fun. Look at the power those people have. The same people who bring down systems through hacking just because it's fun for them. So I would be particularly worried if I was flying out this Christmas. Maybe that's because I'm not flying. I'm
flying tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I think
from Gatwick,
from Heathrow.
But there are other airports and there are other people with drones. And drone technology has been coming for years. They're not toys anymore. They're used in construction. They're used in lots of industries. They're used, obviously, in security.
They're also a major problem for prisons in the smuggling.
Yeah, they smuggle drugs and phones and stuff in there. So this is not something that we haven't been able to see coming. It does seem to be something that politicians seem quite unprepared for.
Certainly will be under discussion what can be done, what kind of technology can be used, so should there be licensing, should new laws be brought in, much to discuss there. Let's move on to The Observer now, and its headline, Corbyn faces furious Labour backlash over backing Brexit. And this is following an interview he gave with The Guardian, in which he suggested he thought Brexit should still go ahead even if Labour won a snap election.
Yes, and apparently people have been holding out hope that perhaps, Labour might mean the answer to reversing Brexit. And I just think that is a pipe dream, and that is just a deflectionary activity. I've been really, really frustrated with, well, everybody who's a Brexiteer is frustrated with Remain, but I've been really frustrated at as a leftist, this idea, it says in this article that, leaving the EU is just a right-wing thing, and Labour should, as a left-wing party, should, turn this ship around. Well, actually, the vote said, we will implement what you decide. Okay, it's not going to turn around. If you really care about the policies that you claim to care about, for instance, about free movement, now is the time to make that case. I believe in free movement, and I think it's so important that it simply cannot be imposed undemocratically, because that is just heading down a path it's going to turn people against you. If you believe in free movement, now is the time to make that case. We have the ability in this country to put forth those policies ourselves, to take control of immigration policy, and that doesn't necessarily mean, I know it's an uphill battle, I am aware of that, but it doesn't necessarily mean we throw up walls. And you have to make that case. And instead, everybody's put their eggs in maybe it won't happen. We put their eggs in that basket.
I think anyone who wants Brexit to not happen should probably have been watching what Jeremy Corbyn has done over the last, 30 years a little bit more closely. I mean, he has always been anti-EU. He's always been very Eurosceptic, more so than Theresa May. I think what we have seen over the last 2 years is Labour, not necessarily Corbyn, but Labour playing quite a clever game of saying we won't do Brexit like the Tories, we'll do something softer and being
a jobs first Brexit.
A jobs first Brexit.
Jeremy Corbyn, but Keir Starmer had given hope of a second referendum.
Lots of MPs have. They've also that nothing's off the table. And the thing is, it probably shouldn't be off the table if you are the opposition party, because your job is to oppose the government, and that's why I think a lot of Labour MPs, and it says in this story, a lot of Labour, left-wing, young Labour supporters who really backed Corbyn feel very betrayed now, not because of the benefits of Brexit or a second referendum, or nothing to do with that, but because he's been so trying to do all things for all people for so long.
But it was his manifesto commitment.
Yeah,
Brexit.
It was,
he's sticking to it.
He is, but a lot of his cabinet ministers have gone around saying that they can stop it or a second referendum. So there hasn't been a unified message from Labour. But yeah, if you've been listening to what Jeremy Corbyn's been saying for the last 2 years, this shouldn't come as a shock.
OK, on that note, we will take a pause. We're going to take a short break, but coming up in a few moments, does singing get you high? We'll discuss that. I promise I won't be singing when we come back. Welcome back to the press preview. We're joined by Rachel Cunliffe and Ashley Frawley to continue our look through the Sunday papers. And let's turn to the Express now. Stressed nurses taking 1 million days off a year.
This is a really worrying story. This is saying that 1 in 10 nurses are leaving the NHS, first of all, because of long hours and poor pay and a lot of the reasons that we know that the NHS is in crisis, but also they're losing over 1 million days a year to stress, anxiety or depression. And those two things are clearly linked. If you've got much fewer people doing an increased workload, and we know that there's an increased workload because of things like sort of an ageing population and problems with sort of dementia, and you've got fewer people doing that and longer hours, people are going to get more stressed out. They're dealing with very stressful life or death situations often, and it's becoming too much for them, and they're leaving the profession, and they're not being refilled either. Also, not feeling valued in what they do, Ashley.
Yeah, well, I train nurses. I do the sociological teaching with nurses at Swansea University, and actually, it's something that we try to prepare nurses for. That there's a huge amount of burnout, and people are only thinking about their first job, and we're telling them, you might cycle through that pretty quickly. It's shocking, the rate of turnover. But I think it's interesting, actually, about identifying the increased intensity of work with stress is that, that the word stress has only been around as a big way of making sense of the experience at work since the 60s. So I think I think that what we're seeing here is not simply the rising intensity of work, which is certainly true, but also a lack of collective movements as well amongst, people demanding for better pay, better conditions. And I think that's something that's really important. It's not just focusing on the nature of the work, but also, to reduce that intensity, but to have better pay and conditions requires collective movements. And without that, I think we actually see across a huge range of occupations, increased identification of the bad experiences of work as stress, as depression, as anxiety. Actually, you can't consider these things outside of social context, outside of the loss of collective movements that could actually socialize that feeling of frustration as something that needs to be, leads to job redesign.
There has been a pay freeze an effective pay freeze for essentially a decade, which I think is under review now, but we know that effective pay rates have been going down.
And staff shortages are a major issue across the NHS, and this saying that there are 600,000 nurses on the register. A third of those, 200,000, are over 50 and likely to retire in the next 10 years, so the recruitment issue is only going to get harder.
And there are various things there, which is that we've made nursing something that you need a university degree for, and the fees for that have massively gone up. And we also know that ending freedom of movement and making it harder for people both from the EU and from abroad to come work here has led to fewer people wanting to do that, and the pound's really weak as well. So we're having a kind of recruitment shortage, both homegrown talent and also from abroad, which is really worrying.
The Health Department, though, saying that they're increasing the starting salary of a nurse by £2,000. There are 11,400 more nurses on our wards since 2010, 52,000 currently in NHS training, and more funding available to increase university training places. But 1 million days off a year being taken by stressed nurses. Somewhere else that's also feeling the stress at the moment is the High Street, also in the Express, page 6 of the Express. VAT shock, what's this about?
Oh, this is the Taxpayers Alliance, which is a think tank, which is pointing out how much tax we're going to pay over Christmas. And the answer is almost £6 billion. Most of that is from VAT. There's also alcohol duties and fuel duty as well, people driving home to see their families, and they're kind of working out what the cost of Christmas is. It says each household would pay £211 to the taxman this Christmas, but the whole page is actually quite Christmassy. They've got a thing at the top about Super Saturday, which was today, which is when...
Not so super
footfall has been down. Shopping last Saturday was also down 10%. Maybe it's because we're just not as much into consumerism as we used to be. Maybe this is the kind of blue planet saving the world's resources.
Well, I'm a huge fan of consumerism, so that would be... I don't know, perhaps it's something around the fear-mongering of we don't know what's going to happen. Oh, well, I know that my paycheck isn't coming until the end of the month, so that's but a free time. I don't know if I'm the only one there. I haven't figured out why. But
that's unusual. You should argue that.
Yeah.
But the internet's been blamed, online shopping's been blamed, but then we had the results from ASOS, for example, suggesting that this is across online retailers as well. Just before we run out of time, we did promise to bring the story about why choirs get you high. Now, what can you tell us, Ashley?
Right, so researchers at Nottingham University have said that communal singing produces a cannabis-like high.
Sign me up.
Yeah, and well, this is interesting because I actually wrote a book about the uses of this kind of research about happiness and so on. And it sounds really science-y, doesn't it? The bliss molecule, soared in women taking part in choir singing. But actually, it's not that surprising that doing things you like makes you happy. And that if you look inside people's brains, you will see that, signs of being happy. And it shouldn't therefore be surprising that if you don't like to sing, you won't have a cannabis-like high. I'm not sure what people expect when they look inside the brains of people. They say, I like something. Wow, something's happening in your brain.
This line, it says, dancing had no effect on levels of the bliss molecule, but it did reduce negative mood and emotions. Great. I don't care about the bliss molecule. Does it make you feel better? Yes, do it.
Yeah, except if you don't like dancing.
Sing some carols this Christmas, and you will get a cannabis-like high.
Do things you like, and you will get a cannabis-like high.
You will be happy.
Eat chocolate.
Eat chocolate, there's Rachel's advice. Rachel and Ashley, thanks very much. Indeed, more coming up at 11 o'clock. Now, though, let's take a look at the weather. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with City AM's comment editor Rachel Cunliffe and the sociologist Frawley. So let's see what's on some of those front pages now. A married couple have been arrested in connection with the flying of drones near Gatwick Airport. That's according to the Sunday Express. Same story for the Sunday Mirror. The couple's neighbours say they are shocked. Ministers are scrambling to ensure that drone attacks can't be replicated by would-be copycats, according to the Daily Telegraph. The Observer reports that Jeremy Corbyn is facing backlash from within Labour's ranks after saying he'd let Brexit go ahead if the party were to win a snap general election. The Sunday Times leads on a warning from the Security Minister Ben Wallace that the terror group Al-Qaeda is planning new attacks on airlines. And the Star reports that singer George Michael's grave still has no headstone 2 years after his death. We're joined tonight by Rachel Cunliffe and Frawley. Good evening to you both. So we're going to start with the Sunday Times and its coverage, a photograph there of Paddy Ashdown, who's died at the age of 77. The headline, I've fought a lot of battles in my life. This was a short battle, but one that he ultimately couldn't win.
One that he couldn't win, but one that, by all accounts, I mean, he fought with a tremendous amount of energy. Just 7 weeks, but he was still working tirelessly right up until the end. If you're on Twitter, lots of tweeting from him, lots of sort of speeches and work in the House of Lords. And so you can really see the kind of the energy and the spirit that has propelled him throughout his career. A career that was involved the military, involved the diplomatic service. He was a spy briefly, really, before going into politics. You think about some of the backgrounds of people going into politics these days, and it's not really as impressive of that.
And he was also unemployed. He was on the dole queue before he joined the Liberal Democrats. Well, the merged Liberal Democrats, the first leader of it. In a decade, took them from what he once described as an asterisk to a formidable force, one that couldn't be ignored.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that this is an interesting opportunity to sort of look back on the party and some of its transformations over time. I think perhaps toward the present, maybe some of that momentum that he gave is being lost. Yeah.
And one of the key things he wanted to do was obviously voting reform as well. He kind of looked into that with Tony Blair, and that was something else, obviously, that Nick Clegg took on in the coalition with sort of David Cameron. And I think it was really interesting for me to look at the fact that that argument about proportional representation, does our political system, first past the post, necessarily work? That's been going on for decades, and I think regardless of what happens with Brexit, that's a conversation that we're probably going to keep on having, work that he started.
You mentioned Tony Blair, David Cameron. They're both paying tribute to Lord Ashdown this evening, and those very generous tributes have come across party lines.
Yeah, and I think when somebody who's been in politics for so long passes away, regardless of what you thought of their policies, you've got to respect their career. I respect him for eating a chocolate hat live on air after he said, when the exit polls came in after the 2015 election, he said, oh, if those are right, I'll eat my hat. And then they were right, and he did. It was made of cake, but he still did it. You know, a sense of humour as well.
Yes.
Do they do that in Canada?
No.
So that is the story on the front of the Sunday Times, the death of Paddy Ashdown at the age of 77 after a short battle with bladder cancer. Let's move on to the Sunday Telegraph now. Brexit, something that Paddy Ashdown was very much against, but Andrea Leadsom warning the House, you cannot stop a no-deal Brexit. What's she saying?
Apparently, that MPs can't prevent the UK from leaving the EU without a deal if they fail to approve Theresa May's deal. And I think that there's an interesting quote from her, apparently in an interview with The Telegraph. She says that those advocating a second referendum risk driving voters away from the Conservatives and sparking support for extremist parties. And I think that's really true. We'll talk about this in a moment with what's happening on the Labour side. But I think it's actually really important that there's a huge number of people in this country who voted Brexit, who would feel unbelievably betrayed. I mean, there is really no going back. And I think that if there's no representation for them, I mean, we are already seeing a dwindling support for mainstream politics, but there's this sort of yawning gap that, should be filled by a progressive movement that actually speaks for the majority of society is just not there. And I think a lot of party politics at the moment is really failing to recognize that.
Well, what Andrea Leadsam's trying to do, I think, is push back against voices in the Conservative Party. You're right, people like Amber Rudd, who have been calling for a second referendum, the more Remain views within the Conservative Party. I think the issue is that there isn't that much support for Theresa May's deal, but there isn't support either. There's even less support in Parliament for a no-deal Brexit. And various MPs have said, it's OK, we'll vote against a no-deal Brexit. And I think, it's not quite clear from this story, but I think the point that she's trying to make is it's not up to Parliament to decide whether there's a no-deal Brexit or not. That's the default, unless you can agree a deal with the EU. Parliament can vote and say we're not going to have a no-deal Brexit. Doesn't matter if the EU won't give you a deal. So she's trying to push MPs, Conservative MPs, towards Theresa May's deal as the only option. It's risky though, because Theresa May's deal still has some pretty massive problems with it. And I think that we'll go on to the Times in a minute. And
yes, let's turn to the Times, because a lot of resistance to Theresa May's deal, but more optimism in Downing Street that she is going to be able to get that deal through, according to the Sunday Times.
Yeah, I haven't heard this before. This is the first time hearing of this, that apparently she thinks that she can win, or Ollie Robbins, who's her negotiator in Brussels, thinks that he can win concessions from the EU in order to get that deal passed. She postponed it in December. It's due for a vote mid-January, and he thinks that he'll be able to get a meaningful concession from the EU on the Irish backstop. What's going to be interesting there is it vague, warm language about how we never expect this backstop to be used, or is it firm legal language in the actual text of the document? That's quite important, because the EU can say whatever they want about whether the backstop is used or not. If it's not in the legal text of the deal, it doesn't count. So that's what they're trying to do at the moment. What's interesting, though, is the headline, May hopes to seal her deal and go on until 2021. Can the Prime Minister last until 2021? That's like another 2 years.
Well, yes. So this is plans that she would hang on to power until the autumn of 2021, when she would hand over the keys of Number 10 to a new Conservative leader. The new Prime Minister would then have about 9 months to prepare their team before the next general election due in May 2022. Is that going to happen?
Well, if you think about what Labour seems to be saying, they're hoping that a snap election will mean that Labour and Corbyn come to power, and there's some hope that the whole thing can be turned around. There are a lot of people who are putting their hopes in Corbyn to halt Brexit, and actually the fact that he has said now that he's not going to do that is leading to a certain amount of backlash within his party.
Yeah, so this is the front of the Observer. Corbyn facing a furious Labour backlash over backing Brexit. This is this interview he's given in the Guardian newspaper over the weekend, when he suggested that he thought Brexit should go ahead and EU state rules would prevent a Labour government intervening to support UK industries. What kind of backlash has there been to this?
So there's some fear that reiterating a commitment to Brexit will alienate younger voters. But I think that the more important problem is the alienation of a huge portion of the working class by Labour and by the political establishment more generally. And I think that it's an opportunity, this is an opportunity for Labour to be pro-Brexit, to be pro-worker, to try and convince this huge number of people that is a potential support base, that is a traditional support base, to come back to the party and for the party to be something that they can believe in, that an economic revival can come from the Labour side. I mean, people talk about that the economic policy wasn't the big thing, but I think that, there isn't really any voice in politics right now that says tomorrow is going to be better than today.
Because it isn't.
Well, I think it's possible. This can be an opportunity. The EU puts in a huge number of rules that prevents the ability to have a renewal in places. You can't have, regional banks, for instance, to invest in regions.
But the EU is also, from a left-wing point of view, it's EU that has been leading on workers' rights and the amount of time that you can make somebody work and work benefits and things like parental leave and sick pay and all kinds of left-wing sort of worker-oriented causes. I think Labour is in trouble over this because, yes, I do appreciate that a lot of their traditional base did vote and support Brexit, but it makes it much harder for them to differentiate themselves from the Tories. What is the message saying, we want another election, this Tory government has failed to negotiate Brexit, give us another election, and if we were in charge, we'd do everything exactly the same.
Well, it was Jeremy Corbyn's
message.
manifesto pledge to continue to back Brexit, but he says if
he
there were a snap election and they won, he would go back to the EU and he would continue to push Brexit, but renegotiate a jobs-first Brexit.
And what's he going to do? He's going to say nicely, please, can we have a jobs-first Brexit? And the EU and Michel Barnier are going to say, oh, we wouldn't give it to Theresa May, but since it's you asking, of course, you can have everything you want. It's absolutely delusional. Labour's plan seems to be join the customs union, at least temporarily. That might be a good temporary plan, a sort of pragmatic way to get something better later on. But the idea that the negotiations would go any better under Corbyn than under May...
Well, negotiations are very much closed on the deal, according to the EU, although that story in the Sunday Times suggesting that Ollie Robbins has been back there for secret talks. Whether or not that is on the deal, though, the withdrawal deal is unlikely, isn't it? But perhaps those reassurances.
But how much those reassurances count for, again, if it's not in the legal text? I think that the Times playing the optimistic card of, oh, yeah, she's definitely going to get her deal through. Remember, just a couple of weeks ago, we thought she wasn't even going to fail to get her deal through. She was going to lose by almost 100, over 100 MPs. Do we really think that 100 MPs have changed their mind?
And according to that in the Times, in terms of the optimism and what a difference a week might make in politics, it says May will seek to capitalise on momentum behind a Brexit deal by inviting all Tory MPs and their partners to a party at number 10 in the week beginning January the 7th. So...
Canapés and champagne at number 10, that's what it's going to take. That's your pro-people's Brexit right there.
OK.
I'm just sad because I wasn't invited.
We will take a short break now. Coming up, can singing make you feel like you're high on cannabis? We'll discuss. We probably won't be testing the theory when we come back. Back tonight, we're joined by Rachel Cunliffe and Ashley Frawley, and we're going to turn to the Express now, and this is the US government shutdown hitting tourists.
Yeah, this is trying to get a British take on the US shutdown, and it's pointing out that British tourists in America over the Christmas period may find various things they want to go to are closed, including all 60 national parks and also national museums, but it's really just a way to point out the effect. I mean, imagine if the British government just shut down because of political gridlock. That's what's happening in the US. 380,000 US federal workers will be ordered to stay at home without pay until they can work out how to avert the government shutdown. And this is over the failure to pass a budget deal. For a budget deal to pass in the US, it has to go through the House and then the Senate and then get signed by the president. And Trump is refusing to sign it because it doesn't have the funding for his big, beautiful border wall, which, by the way, you might remember, was meant to be paid for by Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, this border wall is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's important to remember that the idea that you can control immigration in a serious way, particularly by building a wall, is ridiculous. The futile promise to literally wall off immigration is just a way of scapegoating immigrants for social problems. And actually, we should let this be a lesson to us. Look at the US. There's a huge population of quote-unquote illegal immigrants. So that's what happens when you put in strict policies. You don't stop people from coming. What winds up happening is you have a huge population of highly exploitable and exploited, an underclass of people, and that still drives down wages. And end, and you have, well, we have it already, Fortress Europe. We're just going to put around another fortress, where as soon as you close off the easy ways of getting across the border, people will still come, but they'll come through, treacherous terrain, and they'll die on the way. I mean, that's the situation that we're creating here. I mean, it's very, very serious. But people who love the EU, by the way, have to remember that this is what is around the EU, this border wall, more or less, and that's being patrolled by guns and all sorts of really awful things that are trying to keep people from entering the EU.
I'm not quite sure
kind of thing.
that you can compare the borders of the Schengen area to Trump's border wall, but
no, you can, because basically what you've done is you've cut off the ways that people can enter the country easily, and they still come. It's not that people don't get into rubber dinghies and try to float across the Mediterranean because it's a nice thing to do and they want to go on holiday. The push factors are so strong that people will do absolutely anything to get across.
If you're not careful, he's going to build a wall between the US and Canadian border next. So that has actually been predicted. But I think what's interesting here is that we've got a new Congress coming in to the US in January, and the fact that he couldn't get wall funding through a Republican-led House and a Republican-led Senate implies that the $4.5 billion, it says pounds here, I think it probably means dollars, but the billions of pounds or dollars towards the border wall are probably not going to materialise, and that was obviously a leading campaign promise.
And Donald Trump describing it as going to be a long-stay shutdown. It is, of course, the third government shutdown this year.
People don't get paid during the shutdown. These are ordinary people who are just not going to get paid over Christmas because of Donald Trump's border wall.
They do get paid in Congress, though, while the government's shut down.
He gets paid.
Yes. Let's turn to the Express, also in the Express. And this is Bonanza as food and drink exports soar. So the High Street desperately hoping for a surge in sales on Super Saturday. There has, however, been a surge in British food and drink sales and TV shows being exported.
This is a nice story, a positive story for once. An export bonanza, £768 million, British mince pies, vegetables and sparkling wine that they're drinking in North America, Australia and Asia. Our sparkling wine's really good, actually. I prefer that to a lot of forms of champagne and Prosecco, just in case you're out there. It's just a nice feel-good story about trade and export, because obviously that was a key thing post-Brexit, we're able to trade with the world. It doesn't say why. One reason is likely going to be a weaker pound, which makes these goods better value. They've got a picture there, though, of the Trade Secretary, Liam Fox. It says, Liam Fox is driving exports. I'm not sure you can see sort of Liam Fox as being entirely behind this single-handedly. The idea that he's kind of led this export boom.
Promoting Brussels sprouts, which exports have shot up by 241%.
I mean, what is it about Liam Fox that makes you think of Brussels sprouts? I mean, is there something?
Ashley, I'm just going to move us on to the Mail before we run out of time. Why choirs get you high?
Yes, so apparently a very small study, as these things tend to be, from Nottingham University says that communal singing produces a cannabis-like high, that levels of the bliss molecule soared in women taking part in choir singing. Now, I find these stories kind of interesting because actually they shouldn't be surprising in the slightest. Did you know that something happens in your brain when you like something? Shocking newsflash. Actually, it sounds really lighthearted, but there's this huge industry with this kind of research. I don't know why it's getting so much funds, but there was one recently that someone asked me to comment on. Volunteering to clean up the seaside makes you happier. And I was like, well, if you're the kind of person that likes to volunteer and you're at the seaside, yeah, you're probably happy. But if you drag me out there, knowing that probably the environmental problem is a much bigger issue than I can deal with by spending an hour picking up trash, I'm not going to be very happy about that.
And it is a relatively small study, 9 women aged between 55 and 67 recruited from a local choir force. But I'm all for it. I don't know about you, Rachel. As someone who likes to sing, well, there's an excuse for it now.
I
makes you
love
happy.
singing, especially at Christmas. They did other activities as well, cycling and dancing and stuff. There's a great line there, which is reading also increased levels of this chemical, and it also made people hungry. So if you're feeling hungry after a day of work reading, that's why. I'm not sure if I believe the science or not. I do think that there's something really fun about singing at Christmas. And then at the end they say, oh, and this is why we should have more music taught in schools. So a nice political angle to that as well.
Exactly, that's what they're getting at. And
yeah, if you want a cynical take on it, we'll be singing in the green room after this.
Belt out a Christmas carol in order to make you feel good this Christmas. Anyway, Rachel, Ashley, thank you both very much indeed, and a Merry Christmas to you. Coming up next on Sky News, we'll have more reaction to the death of the former Liberal Democrat leader, Lord Ashdown.